Good afternoon, everyone, and I'll bring this hearing to order. As Administrator Mills has pointed out in testimony before this committee, the Small Business Administration provides credit counseling and contracts to America's entrepreneurs. And today's hearing focuses on the agency's ability to manage its role as a provider or guarantor of credit to small businesses. While the subject of today's hearing may not be riveting, it is vitally important. The subject, the SBA's capacity to manage modernization of its financial systems, is crucial to ensure that the agency can oversee the lending of capital to small businesses without placing taxpayers at an undue risk for defaults. The SBA has utilized a combination of computerized and manual procedures for managing its capital access program since the 1970s. Those systems, according to outside consultants and the Inspector General, need serious updating. The SBA began its modernization effort in late 2005. Shortly thereafter, the SBA fell behind schedule and faced cost overruns. Despite apparent mismanagement, the SBA was given significant sums to continue revamping its computer systems in the President's stimulus bill. The additional funds did not lead to any improvement in the agency's modernization effort. In late 2009, the SBA then spent more than $500,000 on management consultants in an effort to improve the process. A further review in the summer of 2010 led to the realization that the SBA could not perform the updates as originally outlined, nearly 5 years after the SBA started the modernization effort, and this is simply unacceptable. Today we hear from the Government Accountability Office whether the SBA even has the capacity and procedures in place to manage a scaled-down modernization effort. And furthermore, GAO will explain to us the risks that still remain in the SBA loan management accounting system. Little doubt exists among the members of this committee that the SBA plays an important role in providing the capital to small businesses. However, I also firmly believe that every member of the of this committee expects the SBA to manage its information technology in a manner that does not waste taxpayers' dollars and ensures it can obtain accurate information on a loan portfolio in excess of $80 billion. And with that, I turn to Ranking Member Velasquez for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, the Department of Labor reported that unemployment fell to the lowest level in 3 years. This is not only an encouraging sign that the recovery is gaining strength, but also a powerful reminder of the role that small businesses play in our economy. Accounting for more than 6 out of every 10 new jobs, small firms are the engine that will continue driving this recovery forward. However, for this to happen, they need access to abundant and affordable capital. The SBA's loan and investment programs can help in this effort, but behind every successful program must be strong internal checks to manage an agency's use of taxpayers' dollars. Today, we will examine whether the SBA's loan management systems are prepared to meet this challenge and whether reforms that were passed more than 15 years ago have been fully implemented by the agency. When the SBA's loan management systems were first developed in the 1970s, they were state-of-the-art. Although it has been more than 40 years since then, many of these legacy systems are still in service. Today, they manage more than $90 billion in credit, investments, and loan guarantees, far more than when they were first put in place. As they have grown more obsolete, the SBA has found it increasingly more difficult to maintain data integrity, keep information secure, and accurately account for loans. Although SBA has pursued various efforts to upgrade and modernize the legacy system, these efforts have met with minimal success. Those of us who have been on this committee for some time are well acquainted with the agency's struggles to modernize this loan management system. The current efforts date back to 1997, when growing concern over the risks posed by the legacy systems prompted Congress to pass legislation directing the SBA to upgrade its risk management data. That law laid the foundation for important reforms to the loan management system and should have put the agency on the path to a fully upgraded IT system today, more than 15 years since the law was enacted. Unfortunately, many of the reforms mandated in the Act were never fully realized. In 2001, GAO reported that the SBA's efforts to develop and implement upgrades for the legacy system were not consistent with the 1997 Act. Without these basic building blocks for program management, the agency has stumbled from one initiative to another, making only marginal changes to keep its system operational. The most recent initiative, the Loan Management Accounting System, began 7 years ago with a projected cost of $217 million. Already, however, this program has begun to suffer the same delays and cost overruns that have characterized previous modernization efforts. As we will hear today, these shortcomings are the direct result of poor management practices and lax executive oversight. The same problems that have repeatedly been identified by this committee, the Government Accountability Office, the SBA's Inspector General, and private consultants. Perhaps most troubling, however, is the fact that even if successfully implemented, LMAS will not result in a fully modern loan management system for SBA. Instead of a complete replacement of the legacy system, SBA has undertaken a scaled-back effort of limited upgrades. When all is said and done, the SBA will still rely upon a loan management system that is more than 4 decades old. It is difficult to see how this will position the agency for success in the 21st century and beyond. In examining the current state of the SBA loan management systems, there can be no doubt that modernization is desperately needed. The question is how the agency can get it done quickly and get it done right. With millions already spent in this effort, SBA cannot continue to throw good money after bad. The key to this will be strong management, thorough planning, and effective oversight at the highest levels within the agency. I hope that these lessons will be the takeaway from today's hearing. I would like to thank both Ms. Jones and Mr. Pawner for being here for this discussion, and I know we all look forward to hearing what they have to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Our first witness is the Honorable Marie Johns, who is the Deputy Administrator of the United States Small Business Administration. She's responsible for overseeing the day-to-day management of the SBA. Thank you for coming in, Ms. Johns.
Thank you very much, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, members of the committee. As always, it's an honor to testify before you. The Small Business Administration provides access to capital for tens of thousands of small businesses and disaster victims each year. SBA's $90 billion loan portfolio plays an important role in the small business economy. Our loan programs help small businesses who've been left out of traditional credit markets gain access to the capital that they need to grow and create jobs. Today, over 80% of our flagship loan programs are processed electronically, compared with none 10 years ago. Thus, upgrading our loan management and accounting systems, or LMAS, while ensuring security and without disruption to our current lending process, has been a major priority at SBA. In 2005, out of concerns about security, cost, and flexibility, the SBA administrator approved a project to update this 35-year-old legacy system. In 2006, the agency requested development funding for the complete overhaul of LMAS. Work continued in 2007, and in 2008, a contract was awarded to an integration firm to begin transferring SBA's processes to a commercial off-the-shelf program. However, after 12 months of planning and completion of a pilot, SBA identified new concerns about cost, time, and risks associated with the transfer to a commercial off-the-shelf system. The planning and pilot resulted in a revised development cost estimate of $156 million and time to completion estimate of 9 years. Due to these concerns, SBA commissioned an outside study of the LMAS project, which was delivered in December 2009. In addition to SBA's concerns, the study showed that implementing a commercial off-the-shelf program would require retrofitting our loan-making processes to match the software, which could potentially be disruptive to our loan-making efforts. Based upon all of this, the LMAS Executive Steering Committee, that is, the council charged with overseeing the upgrade of LMAS, decided to change course in May of 2010. This decision coincided with the June 2010 Office of Management and Budget Memorandum M1026, which directed agencies to reduce the cost and scope of large automation projects. In September 2010, SBA requested authority from OMB's Financial Systems Advisory Board, or FSAB, to rescope LMAS with a series of more focused and more cost-effective improvements to the existing system, which we call LMAS Incremental Improvement Projects, or IIPs. The IIPs were approved by FSAB in January 2011 and will address the most important issues surrounding the upgrade of LMAS in a less costly, less risky, and more efficient manner. Instead of a complete overhaul, the IIPs involve upgrading the hardware and software of our financial systems infrastructure to support our secure web-based loan making and financial reporting. We estimate development for this new approach will total $39 million, which is an overall savings of $117 million from the LMAS budget estimated in 2009. The incremental improvement approach is better tailored to SBA's current needs and goals. It allows us to make upgrades to LMAS while continuing to make and process loans. Our lenders can still continue to make loans through our web-based process at a record pace while we upgrade the loan accounting software and hardware in the back end. In May 2011, SBA completed the first IIP, upgrading our administrative accounting system to the latest software release. During this time, SBA also implemented changes to our loan programs brought about by the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act and the Small Business Jobs Act. We've also phased out or converted 275 legacy programs to a web environment. This year, we anticipate completing additional improvements to enhance the functionality offered to lenders, disaster borrowers, and small businesses while moving the back office loan accounting and financial reporting processes to a standardized, non-proprietary hardware and software solution. In its audit, the Government Accountability Office stated that there is room for improvement. We at SBA agree. There is always room for improvement. One example of the improvement is the strengthening of executive involvement in the project. The LMAS Executive Steering Council has met 17 times from May 2010 to January 2012. Additionally, SBA has improved documentation of the project's progress. I know these improvements because I have chaired the LMAS Executive Steering Council since December 2010. While we're undertaking these improvements, I wanted to remind the members of the committee that fiscal year 2011 was a record year for the SBA. We supported over $30.5 billion in lending to over 61,000 small businesses. We were able to implement parts of the IIP without any impact to our lending partners or to our borrowers. We recognize the importance of not only continuing to meet the capital needs of small businesses while continuing to upgrade our system, but we are also doing it in a way that is most cost-effective and least disruptive to our lending partners and small business owners. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Our next witness is David Powner.
Correct.
Who's the Director of Information Technology at the United States Government Accountability Office. In that capacity, he directs GAO's assessment of federal agency adoption and use of computer technology. Welcome.
Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, it is a pleasure to be here this afternoon to discuss GAO's findings and recommendations on SBA's loan management and accounting system. In order to strengthen small business, SBA relies extensively on IT systems to support loan accounting and to track loans. The current loan accounting systems are antiquated, expensive to maintain, require extensive data reconciliations, and do not provide efficient loan servicing. In late 2005, SBA initiated the Loan Modernization Program, a $200+ million acquisition that was to take 9 years to complete. In late 2009 through 2010, the Federal Chief Information Officer, OMB's Financial Systems Advisory Board, and an independent contractor found major issues with SBA's approach and management, including stakeholders not being aligned with the projects, undefined business requirements, resource gaps in program management, weak executive governance, and a lack of a target architecture for loan accounting and financial management. In addition, these groups recommended that SBA reduce the scope of the effort by focusing on migrating off the expensive-to-maintain mainframe and putting in place a modern database. SBA, to its credit, is implementing this reduced approach in 7 planned increments that are to be completed by mid-2013 at a cost of around $30 million. One point I'd like to make here, though, is that the costs that you're going to hear today are all over the board, and it's very clear that we don't have a clear baseline when it comes to the cost for this program. Every time we turn around, there seems to be another number that's floated around in terms of the total cost. So we just heard 39. We had 28. One time it was 43. So that's something we need to get to the bottom of. Specifically, the increments include migrating off the mainframe platform, migrating the Cobalt code from the mainframe to a client-server environment, and migrating to a modern database. This incremental, more manageable approach is consistent with current IT and financial reform efforts. Some of the increments are planning efforts to define additional out-year projects to address SBA's loan management and accounting weaknesses. So to be clear, the first 7-increment approach is a start to modernization. There are more incremental approaches to come. Of the 7 increments, 1 is complete, 3 are in flight, and 3 have not begun. Of the 4 completed, our review revealed that the schedules are slipping and costs are increasing. The success of SBA's efforts depend on the ability to address key management weaknesses. First, SBA needs to strengthen its program management. Several areas where improvements need to be made include requirements. All requirements for the increments where contracts have been let have not been completely defined. Risk management. Not all risks are categorized, nor are all mitigation plans in place. And human capital. SBA needs to better address outstanding human capital needs. Second, SBA needs to strengthen executive-level governance that Ms. Johns mentioned. There are 2 governing bodies overseeing this acquisition, and we made several recommendations in this area. Specifically, SBA should clarify the different boards' responsibilities and ensure that the boards perform aggressive oversight of the program's risks and progress. In summary, Mr. Chairman, the good news is going smaller and more incremental could position SBA for a successful modernization, but several of these essential program management and governance basics need to be solidified to position SBA to deliver a modernized loan and financial management system on time and on budget. I would like to stress the importance of executive-level ownership driving these improvements. The Deputy Administrator's Executive Steering Committee is the group to make this happen. Driving change from the top, being rigorous in its approach, holding contractors accountable, and planning beyond 2013 are essential for SBA's successful IT modernization. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. Thank you for your leadership on this important topic, and I'll be pleased to respond to questions.
Thank you very much. I started college 30 years ago, and we were learning Cobalt. That's the punch cards, the little cards. Is that correct? That you fill it, you do a whole bunch of them, you punch. That's how you program the computer to. What's amazing? I'm sorry. I'm just absolutely. It kind of takes me back to the old days. My question to you is, Ms. Johns, have you guys, when you're going through this evaluation process, have you figured out, and you're trying to streamline? I know you're trying to streamline. Being able to work with some of your lending partners, but how many of your lending partners out there are still using Cobalt?
Actually, Chairman Graves, a number of our lending partners use Cobalt. And Cobalt was around when I was in college as well, which has been some time ago. However, Cobalt, even though it's a time-tested computer language, it is still widely used, particularly for the kinds of operations where the SBA needs it. That is to provide the technology platform for some of our back office operations. As I'm saying, in addition to the SBA, many of our lenders use Cobalt. In fact, the House of Representatives system for payroll management for members and staff uses Cobalt. It is still a very widely used language. But that's just a part of our modernization efforts, Cobalt that is. We also use other computer languages, Java, we use Oracle, and so Cobalt is a part of a very comprehensive and complicated architecture.
I guess the question that I have, the basic question is, if you got a consultant and the consultant suggested changes, why didn't you implement? Why did you spend all those taxpayer dollars and not implement the changes? I mean, why was the money spent then?
Well, if I may, I'd like to provide a bit of context going back to, referencing back to my testimony. If you pick up this story in 2005, there was a path that the SBA was going down that was looking at a comprehensive, off-the-shelf product for basically a wholesale change-out of the loan accounting system. The agency did research, actually undertook a pilot, and what quickly was evidenced by that information was that continuing to go down that path would be more costly, more risky, and more time-consuming for the agency. And so at that point, another study was done to say, all right, what do we need to do here? And it was the results of that second study that led us to go the incremental improvement project route. And that was also substantiated by OMB, who in their statements talked about concerns about major overhaul projects and how the incremental approach was much more effective. The issues that we are trying to balance always, Chairman Graves and members of the committee, is that we don't have the luxury of just putting the agency on hold and doing a complete overhaul of the system. At one time, leaders in the agency thought that that might be feasible, but it is not. We still have a $90 billion loan portfolio to manage. We also have to implement the will of this body as a result with the Recovery Act as an example, the Small Business Jobs Act. Each of those major pieces of legislation required changes to the system, and we had to implement the modernization, manage the agency, continue to make loans to small businesses. And in fact, last year we had a record loan of over $30 billion to small businesses at a time when the economy really needed that capital to our small business job creators in the country. So those are the important issues that we have to manage: modernization, maintaining the agency, and ensuring that we're doing that having the very best use of the taxpayer dollar.
Going back to the Cobalt, my staff called the lenders, your lending partners, and none of them use it for their lending practices. They may use it for other reasons or other purposes, but they don't use it for their lending practices. And if you're still using it, though, to do your lending stuff, then it's just not.
I'm not sure
Mr.
if I may.
Chairman, if you yield,
Sure.
you may reference to the money that was given to you under the Recovery Act, right?
Chairman, I made reference to the fact that the agency was responsible for administering the Recovery Act at the same time that we were modernizing. That was the point, that we have we have going concern
and you asked for
responsibilities.
$25 million from the Recovery Act to continue to implement the modernization.
That's subject to check, but and
Well,
your question, I'm sorry.
You asked, we didn't give it to you.
All right.
The administration asked for that money for you. Okay.
But if I could get back to the issue on Cobalt, when you say loan practices, I'm not sure what you mean by that. 80% of our loans are managed through a web interface. So in 10 years, we've gone from 0 web presence to 80+% of our loans being managed through a web interface. So the Cobalt part of our system is a relatively small part of the system, and it serves more of a back office function. And that indeed is similar to many of our lending partners.
Well, they don't. As far as the guaranteed lending goes, none of them use it for their lending practices. And real quick, Mr. Pounder, and then I'm going to turn to your ranking member Velasquez. How many of the recommendations did the SBA implement from their consulting firm?
There were, first of all, the consultant, along with others, they recommended that you take this incremental approach to focus on getting off of Cobalt and the mainframe. So there's clearly we have a start to both of those, migrating off the mainframe. And I think the desire is to get out of the Cobalt world, Mr. Chairman. So those are clearly in the works. Now, the recommendations on improved governance and program management, there were clear recommendations in those two areas, and we found similar weaknesses where those two areas greatly need to be strengthened.
Thank you, Member Velasquez.
I don't know where to start. This is really troubling, especially for members who have been in this committee for decades now. I remember 1997, when we asked you to start the modernization of the loan system. So here we are, 2012, after a GAO report in 2001 that found problems with the implementation of required upgrades. 2007, the IG found deficiencies in lender monitoring system. 2009, the IG found shortcomings in the management of the LMAS initiative. In 2009, SBA paid a private consultant $500,000. In 2010, the IG found that no action were taken to improve the quality assurance management of the project. We understand the challenges because you manage a big portfolio, but because you manage $90 billion in investment and loans is why you need to take this seriously, and seriously means from the top down. And I agree with the GAO conclusion that someone has to be in charge. And I don't think that the directive is coming from the top down. Otherwise, we will not find ourselves almost 15 years after so much money being spent in this predicament. So under the scaled-back approach to LMAs, SBA will make limited upgrades and keep the Cobalt software program, which is now more than 50 years old. And because it's old, it's becoming more expensive also. It's not cheap to maintain. How long does the SBA plan to keep this antiquated system?
Chairwoman, we are...
Ranking member.
I'm sorry?
I'm the ranking
member.
Yeah.
Forgive me. The Cobalt Porting, which is one of the 7 LMAS IIP projects, is actually a project to upgrade to a newer version of Cobalt, which is a non-proprietary version that's open to ensuring that we can use all of the advances in Cobalt that are available to us. Part of the problem previously was we were tied to one vendor and weren't able to take advantage of advances that were in the
I know. You're gonna, but look, you just can't come here every year, report after report, and talk about the obstacles. You're asking for money, we give you the resources. And we're telling you this is serious business. Mr. Powner, what are some of the risks and costs associated with continuing to use Cobalt programs rather than moving to more modern software?
Well, clearly the cost to maintain Cobalt code, even the newer versions, there's not many programmers out there that understand that language. So you'll see many federal agencies trying to get off of the Cobalt, out of the Cobalt world. If you look at the goals of the modernization, I still think it's to migrate off of the mainframe. Even though we've ported Cobalt code to a client-server environment, I would imagine that down the road the future increments would be to get out of Cobalt entirely, along with modernizing the loan system. So that's what's really important to take away here is these first 7 increments, 4 of them have deliverables, 3 of them are studies, and those studies actually will lay the groundwork and the path for future modernization, and that's very important. I would bet that Cobalt will come up as part of those future efforts.
Mr. Chairman, I will come back with some other questions.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, also Ranking Member, and thanks for the panelists for being here today. Honorable Johns, when you said 3 things that, kind of harken back to a previous career I had. You said that you had to balance modernization, maintaining the organization, and steward of taxpayer dollars. And that sounded like the organization I spent 22 years with, the United States Army, and I saw us go from a Jeep to a Humvee, armored personnel carriers to Bradleys, M60 tanks to M1 tanks, you name it. So we're talking about new systems integration, and one of the things that, of course, we looked at, do you have a new systems integration implementation plan with an execution timeline, with measures of effectiveness? One thing I am concerned about is that who is the singular belly button that's responsible for this, because that's part of unity of effort and unity of command. So can you kind of walk me through, what is the plan out there in your timeline so that you can execute this and we don't have these overruns? And what are the measures of effectiveness as you go through? I mean, do we have a phased plan of integration?
Yes, Congressman, thank you for the question. We do, indeed. Part of the GAO report addressed the issue of governance. There are two bodies who have been involved with the oversight for the LMAS program. We have an oversight body called the BTIC, the Business Technology Investment Council or Committee. And that oversight body has responsibility for technology improvements, technology upgrades, enterprise-wide. So they look across the SBA and manage new technology. Are we making the right investments? How is that moving? How does that fit within the enterprise architecture? And so on. And so when the decision to go down the road of LMAS incremental improvement projects, the BTIC approved that approach. But then we realized as an agency that we needed to have an oversight body that was singularly focused, because this was a project of such magnitude and cut across the entire operations of our agency. We wanted to make sure that we had an entity that was focused on LMAS IIP. And that led to the creation of the Executive Steering Council. So that's the explanation of why there are two bodies. There really is no confusion about that. They have distinct responsibilities, and there's significant operational overlap because many of the individuals who serve on the BTIC are also part of the Executive Steering Council, the CIO, the head of our Office of Cap Access, for example, the CFO. Those are examples of individuals who serve on both bodies.
But who's the one person in charge?
Well, I chair the ESC.
Okay. So everyone reports back to you?
That is correct.
Okay.
Now, you asked about a plan and a timeline. We have a plan. The timeline is that we've committed to completing these incremental improvement projects by the end of fiscal year 13. We have had some slippage of due dates within that process. That is not unusual for a project of this magnitude, and yet we are we are continuing with making progress toward our commitment to have these 7 projects done by the end of fiscal year 13. And if I may say a word about this issue of cost overruns. As Mr. Powner indicated in his testimony, the GAO audit has found that the SBA can do a better job in terms of how it presents information and how that information is labeled. And because we have recognized there's been some confusion about how data has been used to draw certain analyses in the past. The fact of the matter is we were on a path to spend $156 million. The path that we're on currently is $39 million and represents a savings of $117 million to the taxpayer. In fact, since our IIP approach was approved, we've actually had a $4 million reduction from the baseline because our budget was cut. So we are very cognizant of our responsibility to report back to this body and to the public at large that we are using this money as effectively as possible, maintaining the schedule for modernization, and running an agency that gets capital in the hands of small businesses.
What's your percentage measure of effectiveness on this implementation plan? 0 to 100%. Where would you say you are?
Congressman, I can't give you a number in that regard. What I can say is that we have completed the first project under the IIP. We've made substantial progress on most of the other projects. We have 3 additional projects that are a bit more downstream where we're still in the planning phase and haven't yet awarded a contract, but we are meeting on a regular basis, and the team assures me that we are on pace to meet the 2013 implementation.
Let me just say this. If I was standing before a general and I could not tell him what the measure of effectiveness percentage was where we were in the project, I would be relieved of command. I'd be fired. So please, I would say if you're having these council meetings, the first question you should ask, what's our measure of effectiveness? Mr. Powner, you have anything you want to add, and then I'll yield back.
Well, no, I think that's clear. I want to make it clear also, too, that these first 7 increments, when we talk about the 39 million and comparing that to the 156, there's a difference in scope, because the 156 included modernizing some of the loan programs. This is really focused on infrastructure changes, putting in place a database, migrating off the mainframe, and porting Cobalt code. We still have to modify applications to modernize our financial systems and the loan systems. So that's important that we're talking apples to apples when we talk 156 to 39.
Will the gentleman yield?
You're in charge. Yes.
I'm glad to hear that. Mr. Pounder, going back to the $39 million, right, in cost saving by terminating existing LMA's AS projects, should the agency really be claiming these savings when the final costs and completion date are under considerable risk of overruns?
Yeah, I think the total cost is a big TBD. So when you look at the 7 increments, 3 of the increments, one is prioritizing additional projects. Next is implementing those additional projects. The third is documenting processes so that the business keeps up with the technology. Those additional projects will comprise modernizing SBA's loan accounting system. Okay, so the total cost is still a TBD when you look at modernization overall.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, let's get back to the number and what constitutes, what are the elements of the number. I mean, we've got information here that $100 million has already been spent. We've only completed one piece of the IT program. Am I to understand, Mr. Pounder, that you're saying that $100 million was used for other improvements that we're not talking about?
No, I don't think it was used for other projects. I think we have just a fairly significant de-scoping of the project.
But we've already spent $100 million.
You mean
answer is yes.
historically? Historically. Oh,
the answer is yes.
on the predecessor.
So my concern is the original, to change the whole bloody system out, was supposed to be $217 million. We spent $100 million. We actually spent more than that because we already spent a little bit of the 39 or whatever the magic number is. So we've already spent half of the total turnout for one project out of 7. And I'm very concerned that we have more studies going on. I mean, we could study this. We'll be on Cobalt 15, which is, I think, totally unacceptable by every member of this committee. If I was to poll this committee, I think there's a single person here that thinks a new version of Cobalt is appropriate for a small business administration going forward. You're a relatively small agency. You have the unique opportunity to be more nimble than many, many others. And I think while the incremental approach is understood, there's a limited amount of dollars out there. I get that. But to base it on going to Cobalt 54 or whatever your new number is, I think that's not good. What I would like is a report back to the committee about what the different elements are and what you think they will cost, beyond just the IT piece also. I want to know, is the number 28? The sheet we have in our packet here, Table 2, the numbers don't add up to 39. They add up to like 28, maybe 30. So I'm as confused as everyone else about what the IT piece is. And if I read this correctly and listen to the testimony correctly, you've talked about studies. What costs are we going to incur as a result of what the studies recommend the Small Business Administration do? I think it's really important this committee have a full understanding of the scope of what's in front of it so we don't, frankly, assume you're gaming us down the line. If you give us honest information up front about the total scope, we can have that discussion now and not be at loggerheads, I think, in the future.
Congressman, to your point, one of the increments is titled root cause analysis, and what it is it's a prioritization of those additional projects that you would like to see. There's a June 2012 delivery date that our report points out. I think that's very important that we get that game plan going forward, to your point, on what those additional projects are and what the associated costs are.
And why aren't we going to a web-based technology? I mean, why go through all this? This is pretty simple stuff. I mean, you know, it's you can get this stuff off the shelf. Any business gets this sort of information, has banks do this. I mean, I don't think too many banks, I assume, are not on Cobalt. You could correct me, but there's got to be a smarter way to go about this, anticipating the cloud. Why aren't we thinking like that, eh?
Well, Congressman, actually we are. As I said in my testimony, 80% of our interface with our lenders is web-based. So there's a lot of discussion about Cobalt. That's taken up a lot of the attention of the committee, and certainly you have the right to investigate whatever you choose. But Cobalt is a very small piece of this overall project, set of projects. As I said earlier, it is a part of the back office operation. We are doing that in concert with many of our lender partners who also use Cobalt in the same manner. Cobalt is used, as I mentioned, by this House of Representatives for certain financial
Yeah, but
systems.
the House of Representatives, we're
And-
antiquated. We're so back in the dark ages. You're comparing us with dinosaurs. I'd like to be compared with the Maseratis, the Morgans, some fancy car that's moving into the 21st century.
The Air Force, Defense Logistics Agency. The point is, we did not set out to look for the low standard. We set out to figure out how to make sure that we were modernizing our systems, running a good agency, getting capital out there, and doing all that in the most cost-effective and the most risk-averse way. And that's what led us to the incremental improvement projects, which is in concert with what OMB, GAO are saying is the route we should be taking, and Cobalt is a small piece of that overall very comprehensive plan.
Well, in my business, perception is reality. I get rid of Cobalt, man, you look a lot better right off the bat. You're talking about going forward. This is just the real world. And I think for your own office, you'd be better off.
I appreciate that, Congressman. Our view is that we would rather make the case for why we're going a route that we think is prudent and is getting the best bang for the buck.
All right. Appreciate that. I'll yield back. Thank you.
Do what? Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the time. Go ahead. Shoot.
In terms of the committees you've set up to administer or to monitor this program, do you have anybody sitting on those committees who has a prior institutional experience of an entity of this size of doing the type of conversion that you're now going through?
Yes, Congressman, we have our CIO is on the Executive Steering Council, our CFO, the head of our Office of Capital Access, as well as other senior leadership from the Office of Capital Access.
Now, they've had prior experience in another institution making a computer conversion of this magnitude?
These are all people who bring exceptional experience to this project. I cannot give you detail about their experience in other organizations, but they're very experienced in terms of SBA, the history of this project, and have been excellent thought partners in how we need to move forward in terms of balancing all the critical objectives that I've spoken to earlier. Risk, cost,
I understand that
timeliness.
folks may have excellent skills, but because of the magnitude, the size of the agency, the dollars involved, the complexity, it would seem to me that having someone who had prior institutional experience in this type of conversion would be very appropriate to be leading it.
Well, in addition to the individuals that I've mentioned, Congressman, we also have outside consultants who are subject matter experts and bring state-of-the-art expertise to bear as well.
Who might those be?
I can provide the names of the companies if you would like.
That would
for me
be
to
very
do
helpful.
Certainly. We'll do
Thank
so.
you. I yield back.
May I?
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely. Go ahead.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
is the CIO sit on that? Who is responsible? Who is
Yes.
in charge?
Yes, Ranking Member. The Chief Information Officer is a member. He chairs the BTIC, and he is a member of the Executive Steering Council.
Is that position is being vacated or not?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
So let me ask you, OMB had a role in scaling back the LMA's project and approving the current set of projects. To what extent is OMB involved in the planning for future improvements?
Well, we report regularly to OMB about our progress, and even the Inspector General. We regularly keep the Inspector General apprised of how we're proceeding, and have even invited a member from the Office of the Inspector General to join our Executive Steering Council meetings. We hope that will happen, but that invitation remains open to them. And in fact, I'm looking forward to Mr. Pounder joining us as well at a meeting, because we're clearly, it is my intent that we draw from all the expertise that we can across the government and outside of the government, because certainly not on my watch would I want to endanger our ability to serve our small businesses and make sure that our loan management accounting system is functioning as effectively as possible.
It might not be under your watch, but it has taken 15 years, basically, 1997, so maybe 15 years later, under somebody's watch.
Well, I'm working very hard to lay a very strong foundation.
I yield
Ranking
back,
Member.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, I want to thank both of you coming in light of the time constraint with votes. We'll go ahead and close the hearing, but I expect the committee is going to continue to examine where the SBA is continues to update its financial systems, because we want to protect the taxpayer. That's the biggest thing. I'd ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is adjourned.